I've only ever feared for my life once before. When I was 7, a neighborhood dog got loose while my friend Tom and I were playing catch. It chased after me, barking and growling. My little mind genuinely feared death. I was convinced that dog would kill me. Luckily, its owner, an older man, called it over and locked it back in the yard behind the fence. He comforted me, assuring that his dog was merely playing and was quite friendly. He asked me too if I'd like to meet his dog properly while my parents were around so I'd feel safer. I agreed, and after explaining everything to my parents, we walked to properly meet the young German Shepherd. Max, the dog, was quite playful and was eager to meet me. He brought me toys to throw and would race around them, just to bring them back so I could throw them again. I felt silly for thinking this pup wanted me dead. In fact, I was close with Max until he passed of old age. Over 15 years later, and I find myself in a similar situation. Only this time I know it won't end like it did with Max. I know this thing chasing me wants me dead. It's already killed my friends. Tom and I stayed friends into college. Both of us enrolled in the same school after we graduated. I was studying for cinematography, while Tom was learning film and television production. We both were massive fans of ghost hunting shows and were dead set on creating our own. Our passion for it even attracted some of our classmates. Derek, a year below us studying sound and audio design. Tracy, another film production student, as well as our local skeptic. And Beth, a top-notch film editing student and the girl of my dreams, though she didn't seem to notice. We all got together and decided to start our own paranormal investigations club, each of us with our own jobs and roles to contribute to the club and eventual show. Things were slow at the start. We suggested checking out abandoned areas, but Tom was insistent on getting the building owner's permission first. "Last thing we need is a trespassing charge," he'd say. He was right, but it made for slow nights of sitting in one of our dorms, watching ghost hunting shows as a research. We got the occasional home, supposedly haunted by Victorian ghosts that just ended up being very squeaky floors and loose pipes. We once got a bar downtown that was rumored to have glasses thrown at customers and women's skirts lifted. But if there were any spirits there, they stayed far away from us. Our best evidence so far was a chair we caught moving on camera. We posted that to YouTube and were surprised when it hit over 100,000 views. But besides that, nothing but dust specks on our night vision cameras and barely audible whispers on our EVP recorders. One day, Tom burst into the room with a huge grin on his face, like he'd just won the lottery. The four of us exchanged puzzled glances, waiting for him to speak. "Panhurst Asylum," he whispered. It took a moment for all of us to realize what he meant. An air of excitement filled the room, and we immediately began discussing plans. Panhurst Asylum was an old mental institution built in the 1800s just outside of town, deep in the woods. Its seclusion made it perfect for different testing and experiments, which eventually led to it closing in the early 1900s. Rumors of hauntings started circulating immediately. Full apparitions, clear voices, physical attacks. Lastly, new rumors have spread. It became a hotspot for the local homeless population, until one day a homeless man was found dead. Well, what was left of him. The owner asked the police to do something about the intruders, and when they arrived they found a horribly mutilated corpse, deep cuts and pieces of his body missing. They deemed it too clean for an animal mauling, and figured a bum went crazy and cut this guy up to lay claim to the turf or something. Bodies kept turning up and eventually people stopped going there. People say that the crazy cannibal homeless guy is still there, and so paranormal investigators won't go there overnight. Well, until now. Tom had pestered the owner until he eventually gave in, giving us permission to investigate for hauntings. He signed a document just in case the cops suspected us for trespassing. His only warning was to be careful, and if we saw any crazy homeless guys to get the hell out of there. Tom ignored the poor guy, already imagining the amount of amazing evidence we'd get. He figured 5 college students were enough to overpower a crazy homeless man, even if he had a knife. We arrived at the asylum after nearly an hour of driving through the woods. The sun was going to set soon, so we didn't have a lot of time to set up. The building was huge, 3 floors tall, expansive east and west wings, and a stairwell at each end. The front doors were padlocked, but the owner had told us about a window on the west wing, room 119, that could be open from the outside. Tom climbed in, and we began passing our equipment up to him. It wasn't much. A college student's budget only goes so far in paranormal investigations, but it all got the job done. Once everything was inside, Tom helped Tracy up. I cut my hands and braced my back up to the wall so I could help Beth climb up. She smiled appreciatively and pulled herself into the room. Derek immediately climbed up after her, then reached down to pull me in. The crisp autumn air nipped at us. Luckily, I had my jacket. I could tell it would only get colder. I had the keys to the car in my jacket pocket. I stuck some of the keys between my fingers, readying myself for any knife-wielding hobos to charge at us. But none came. Tom shut the window and went over the plan once more, something he did at each hunt even though we were all familiar with the routine. Start by combing the place room by room as a group, figure out spots for our 3 cameras, split into teams of 2 while one stays at home base, and find us some ghosts. After a short pep talk from Tom, we started combing the place. It was slow and tedious, especially in a building this big, but knowing the layout of a place helps when you're going to be walking around it in the dark. This place even more so with the rumors. We started on the first floor, starting from 130 at one end and moving toward 100 at the other, checking every room in between. Tom had said the owner warned him most doors would be locked or stuck shut, and sure enough, only 4 or 5 opened. We moved up to the second floor, still no murderous men or cannibalistic cretins, but our guard was still up. Tom and Derek led the way, Tracy and Beth sticking close together, with me bringing up the rear. I should have been keeping an eye out, but I couldn't help sneaking glances at Beth. I was glad we had formed this club. Even if we never found ghosts, at least I had gotten to meet her. As Tom was pushing the door to 227 open, we heard shuffling upstairs. We froze, our eyes darting to each other and our ears sharp. There it was again, faint but definitely there, distant shuffling and the occasional thud. Derek immediately pulled an EVP recorder. Beth and I turned our cameras on. It was rare we got anything, let alone during our initial sweep. Tracy was dismissive of it, saying it was probably just a homeless guy taking advantage of the vacant space. But Tom was already rushing up the stairs. We quickly followed, hitting the middle landing and dashing up the second set. Tom froze at the top. The rest of us stopped and strained our ears. The sun had finally set. Moonlight was the only thing keeping the halls from becoming an abysmal black. Another soft thud. Louder but definitely echoing from down the hall. Even in the dim lighting, I could see Tom's face light up. He shushed us and motioned for the group to follow. I've got to admit, even I was getting excited. This was bound to be great footage. Hell, this might even be our best hunt yet. We crept down the hall, slowly getting closer to the noises. The room numbers descending as we quietly and eagerly approached. I started to feel strange. The noises, the thudding, they didn't sound ghostly. They sounded real, heavy, wet. A horrible smell was growing stronger the closer we got. Beth had covered her nose completely, and Derek nearly gagged. Eventually we came to the source, room 305. We stopped short of the doorway, frozen by a sense of unease and dread. Even Tom seemed to have lost his excitement. He knew these sounds weren't spirits. He knew this smell wasn't a ghost or a demon. This was death. Derek nudged Tom and pointed to the ground. The floor was covered in debris, and under all of it was a massive dark stain. Tom shakily pulled a flashlight from his pocket and gulped before clicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, slightly illuminating our surroundings, but casting a blinding spotlight on the deep red streaks on the ground. The debris was a combination of litter, meat, and shards of bone, all leading to the room in front of us. The beam slowly moved to the doorway to show no door. Deep gashes in the wall next to it surrounded by more dark stains. Beth covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. I squeezed her hand and took a step back, instinctively grabbing the keys in my jacket pocket, even though I knew they wouldn't be much help. Tom stood frozen, the light trembling in his shaking hand. It took me a moment to notice, but Tom must have noticed too. The noises we had been following stopped. The only noises now were our panicked breaths and a low growl coming from the room. Movement from inside the room and a large, clawed hand clutching the doorway were enough to put us into action. Well, most of us. Tom and Derek spun around immediately, and I practically had to drag Beth by the hand. But Tracy, I imagine the fear of the shock of the situation must have kept her too still for too long. None of us even looked back when she screamed, and we definitely didn't look when it was cut short. We desperately tried opening doors as we ran, but not a single one budged. The sounds of the monster giving chase was enough for us to abandon that idea quickly. You know that saying, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friends? I wasn't in front, but at least I wasn't in the back. Tom was a track star in high school, so he had a good lead on us. He kept Beth ahead of me because, even in a life or death situation, I can't stop thinking about her. And Derek desperately panted behind us. We didn't look back, both in fear of what we'd see, and that it would slow us down even a little. Tom reached the stairwell. He turned and practically flung himself down the stairs. Beth followed, with me close behind. She turned to check on Derek and but I spun her back around, urging her to just keep running. We hit the landing and turned to descend. I glanced up, worried about Derek. He rounded the corner and took his first step. The moonlight illuminated his terrified, tear-soaked face. Then in a pale blur, and with a sickening thud, he was gone. I could hear his bones crunch from the sheer force of the impact. His screams turned to wet gurgling, which was immediately drowned out by the monster's own screech. Beth yanked my hand, and we continued down. Our only hope, our only way out, was the way we came in. I led Beth down past the second floor toward the first, trying my hardest to ignore the pure terror flooding through my veins. We hit the first floor and turned into the hall, the sounds of our monstrous pursuer echoing in the stairwell. Tom was already there, desperately trying to pry open any door he could get his hands on. As we ran past him, I grabbed his arm. He jumped, completely terrified as if forgetting there were others in here with him. A wave of relief washed over him, but was quickly overcome by terror as the sounds of the monster grew louder. I pointed to 119, begging him to follow. We ran as hard and fast as we could, nearly slipping as we came to a stop. I twisted the handle, the door opened out toward the hallway, and I practically shoved Beth in. Tom dashed in after, and I pulled the door shut behind me as the creature came around the corner of the stairwell and into the hall. Beth stood shaking in the center of the room while Tom and I piled everything we could get our hands on in front of the door. Our equipment, supplies, what little furniture there was in the room. The door started shaking violently as the creature banged on it, desperately trying to break its way in. Beth screamed and covered her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. I ran to the window and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I struggled, the frame wouldn't move an inch. I cursed and stripped my jacket off, then started wrapping it around my hand so I could smash the glass and get us out of here. Then, silence. The door stopped shaking. The creature stopped growling. Everything just stopped. We stood, confused and staring at the door. Why had it stopped? Had it given up? Had it gone back upstairs to finish its earlier meals? Was it looking for another way in? My heart stopped. My stomach felt as if it had fallen thousands of feet and I fell sick. The doorknob slowly turned and the door creaked open. The moonlight shone in spots through the window. The growing crack in the door was pitch black except these spots lit up by the moon. Pale, tight skin wrapped around a tall, skinny, human-like creature with elongated limbs. A large clawed hand grabbed the door, slowly pushing it open. The only color came from the messy splotches of bright red on its skin. But the most unsettling thing about this horrifying caricature of a person was the unnaturally large grin adorned with seemingly hundreds of sharp, jagged teeth. That fucking smile. Like it knew exactly what it was doing. It knew exactly how to scare us, and it loved every second. I desperately beat on the window while Tom and Beth backed away from this monster. This demon. It easily pushed our barricade aside, piece by piece, then ducked through the doorway and into the room. It was easily 7 feet tall, maybe 8. Its sunken eyes pierced us as a low growl escaped its mouth. Tom, whether in a blind fit of panic or a completely sane understanding that we needed a distraction, took a swing, a blur, and his arm was across the room, sliding to a halt on the messy tile floor with a trail of blood marking its path. He stared in shock at his arm, now across the room, then at the stump where it had once been. He opened his mouth to scream before the creature grabbed him and bit into his neck, sending blood in all directions and soft gurgling whimpers from my dying best friend's throat. I finally managed to smash the window and practically threw Beth out of it. The poor girl had just stood frozen, watching the whole thing, but I had to get her out of here, get us to safety. I jumped out behind her, but not before a searing hot pain slashed across my shoulder blade. I winced as I hit the ground. Luckily, the surge of adrenaline and the cold air of freedom sprung me to my feet. I grabbed Beth's hand, and we made a dash to the car. She climbed into the passenger seat, and I into the driver's. I fumbled the keys out, cursing myself as I nearly dropped them, and was startled by Beth's scream. She was crying, staring out of the front windshield. I followed her gaze. It stood, maybe 10 feet from the car, illuminated only by the light of the moon, staring at us. Tom's body held on one hand like it was nothing. She shouted at me to start the car. I plunged the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life and the headlights turned on to light up. Nothing. The creature was gone, and so was Tom. We sat, confused and scared, staring straight ahead. I looked over at Beth, the tears still coming down. She looked back at me, her voice trembling. Where is it? The passenger window shattered. A pale clawed hand wrapped around her face and yanked her body out of the car and into the forest. Her screams faded and were cut altogether. I stared at where she had been sitting, my heart in my throat and tears stinging my eyes. Streaks of her blood stained the broken glass. The bushes that she had disappeared into rustled and slowly started to reveal that fucking grin. I instinctively threw the car in reverse and sped out of there. It took over an hour to reach the nearest police station. My shoulder was on fire from the medium-sized gashes, and I was immediately questioned on what the hell happened. I didn't know what to say. I told them we got permission to investigate the asylum, and during our investigation we ran across a crazy homeless guy with a knife. He killed my friends and cut me as I escaped. What else was I supposed to say? There's no way they'd believe me. Hell, I don't believe me. They took me to the hospital to patch me up while a half-dozen squad cars went down to the asylum. They searched the whole place and found the bodies of my friends, as well as a room filled with the remains of countless more. The only body they didn't find was Beth's. I figured that thing hadn't left anything behind of her, and even if it did, those woods were too big to find anything. The media covered it like crazy. And of course they never found the crazy homeless guy, but they also never found the creature. It's been months, and they constantly monitored the asylum. But nothing, no attacks and no deaths. It just disappeared. At least, I thought it did. Now I'm starting to think it followed me. Maybe it was stuck in those woods, didn't know how to leave or where to go, and stayed alive because the homeless population kept it fed. Before I left, it grinned. Like it knew what it was doing. Like it knew it could follow me and have even more to eat. A damn near all-you-can-eat buffet. So far, they've found 3 bodies in my apartment complex. Well, what's left of them anyway. There's lots of empty rooms in this building, an unused basement, and a scarcely visited boiler room. Plenty of places to stay hidden. The victims are always near me, either on my floor or the one below or above me. The doors are kicked in, nearly off the hinges. The victims are cut up and almost look eaten, but it's too clean to be an animal attack. Each night there's an attack, I'll hear things right outside my door. Shuffling, scratching, wet thumping, a low growl. Then my doorknob will turn, but the door won't open because of the deadbolt. Last night, when the third attack happened and the noises started, I worked up the courage to look through the peephole. The only thing visible in the small lens was a large, bloodied, clawed hand and a pale face, skin pulled tight around it, with that fucking grin.